Life is like a hurricane here in Torontoburg. Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes. It's a dark blur. Hey, what's up everybody? I am in Toronto. And it has actually been over a week since I've been here. I just haven't had the time to sit down and make a video. I've been so slammed working on the boys, but today that changes right now. I am making a video. It is about the best settings for my Sony A7III for street photography. Stay tuned. But real quick, before I get into making this video, you are going to notice that something is missing. That is my Create hat. I don't know what happened to it. None of these hats really work for me. I gotta go make a new Create hat. So let's go do that. That was a trip. I love you, Toronto, but if there's one thing I have to say is that pedestrians in this city, they do not pay attention to anything. Anyway, I got it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Create Hat 2.0. And of course I changed the font because why not? Never do the same thing twice. Anyway, here we go. I want to talk about the new A7III because it is the perfect, I think, the almost perfect street photography camera. It's pretty amazing paired with my Sony f1.4 35mm lens. So the first thing I do, I switch to manual photography mode. I don't mess with shutter or aperture priority or automatic or any of that stuff. I switch to manual. I shoot raw, of course. I throw a fresh brick in there, a fresh battery. One fresh battery will, especially if you're doing street photography, will pretty much last you all day long. That is huge. Marked Sony improvement. I throw a Tiffen circular ND filter on my camera. I want and like to use the fastest lens I have. That means the lowest f-stop number. So f1.4 for that milky, shallow, carve out your subject's depth of field vibe thing. Just looking at what I'm shooting right now, I'm on an f2. You can see how blurry I am and how in focus this is. That's the kind of effect that I like to get. The other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my shutter, and assuming you're outside in the daytime, I'm gonna take my shutter and I'm just gonna kind of move it around, take my circular ND filter, kind of find the middle of my circular ND filter, so where it's not too dark, not too bright, and I'm gonna take my shutter speed and I'm gonna lower it to a shutter speed that exposes properly. I like to use this histogram right here for exposure. As long as the mountain and all of the white stuff is inside of this square, then I know that I have exposure. I don't want my shutter speed to be too slow. I want it to be at least 320 because again, for my preference, I don't like the streaky, I don't like the motion blur. I like to capture things really crisp. So here's the weirdest thing that I do. I don't use the shutter or the f-stop really anymore. I lock those in place. I use the ISO and the circular ND filter. Those are my two variables. And now this is a completely different way of shooting photography. I've never shot photography this way. Usually you're toggling your f-stop and your shutter speed, maybe your ISO, but you don't want to get it too high because everything gets kind of noisy. I like to tilt the screen up at about a 45-degree angle. And when I shoot photos, I shoot from the hip sometimes. I'll have the camera down here and I'll look at people and they don't notice that you're taking a photo of them as much because the camera is down here. I found myself using the screen a lot more than the viewfinder. Let's talk about focus. I keep the focus on wide autofocus pretty much all the time, and it's not perfect. It's not always gonna get what I want in focus, but this camera actually has a really nice touchscreen feature. You can put a focus square wherever you want to. So if I really want to grab a specific subject, I'll just drop a focus square. All of a sudden I'm in a spot focus mode, so I can just aim that little focus square, hold this button down halfway, get it in focus, move around and shoot, and that's my focus. Now let me just take you through my menu settings. This is what I found to be the best custom settings for all the buttons on this camera. So I'm gonna go to menu and I'm gonna go into custom keys. We're gonna start with the control wheel. Control wheel is this spinny guy back here. By default, it was set to nothing, but I wanted to set it to ISO because I wanted to be able to spin around and change my ISO quickly. So I switched to ISO. The one downside to this is if you push a little bit too hard, you might go into another mode and start spinning, and if you're not paying attention, you might mess up some of your settings. I caution you with using the control wheel for ISO, but I recommend giving it a shot. It's very handy to have a spinny wheel just to change your ISO. For custom button 1, I set this to white balance. I use white balance more for video. I pretty much keep it at automatic white balance for street photography and any stills. Since I'm shooting raw anyway, I can change my white balance in Lightroom, but I'm just used to having white balance on this button, so that's where I set it. Custom button 2, I have set to autofocus, manual focus control. Sometimes you just have to switch into manual focus in order to really fine tune and grab focus on something. Custom button 3. Custom button 3 I use to toggle silent shooting. I really like silent shooting. I keep my camera in silent shooting most of the time. It's great when I'm on set shooting photos. I don't make any noise when they're rolling. That's kind of honestly one of the #1 reasons I switched to mirrorless cameras back in the day. It's also really great for street photography because people don't hear that like Custom button 4, which is the trash can icon. I use this for monitor brightness. There are 2 default settings in the A7 for monitor brightness. One is called manual and one is called sunny weather. Sunny weather does juice the battery more, so I don't like to keep it on that all the time, but when you're outside and you're using the back screen, the sunny weather feature makes it bright and visible, and it's very easy and very comfortable to use. Moving over to the next tab. For the top button, for the joystick button, I have it set to zebra. Sometimes I like to check my exposure by turning on zebra stripes. I have zebra stripes set to 100 plus, so I know that if there's zebra stripes, I'm losing information. So I can rack or rotate my ND filter or change my ISO till the sky is properly exposed and I don't see any zebra stripes, or I can leave a little bit of zebra stripes if it's the sun or something like that. They really annoy me for composition because it's like all these stripes like flying around that are distracting me. I turn them off most of the time. It's nice to have a button that just boom, boom, boom. For the center button, this button right here, I have that set to peaking display. Peaking only works in manual focus. I have that set to give me these red crispy dots whenever anything is in focus. I leave it on most of the time, but again, sometimes when you're manually focusing, they can get annoying if you're trying to do like a really precise photo of a flower or something like that. Let's talk about the buttons on the circle itself. The circle gives you 4 buttons. The display button, this button over here, which says ISO, bottom, and over here, left and right. These 2 buttons, left and right. You can change them to whatever you want to, even though they wrote in some text, just like any Sony camera. The top button, I leave it display. It's always nice to toggle through the display. Sometimes you want to see a bunch of information, sometimes you don't. So I just leave it on display on all my Sony cameras. If I hit the left button, that's my drive mode. Do I want to shoot one photo at a time? Do I want to shoot... Hello, Toronto. When I do street photography, I like single shooting. There's an argument to using the multiple shooting drive mode because you can capture a lot of photos quicker, but I find that I shoot a bunch of photos that I don't want and I throw them away. I like to do a little bit of composing with my photos. When I press the down button, I have my focus area. I pretty much default to wide focus, but sometimes you want to switch it to centered focus if I'm shooting video, or spot focus. You can use the little joystick and kind of do like old school Canon and Nikon style where you move the little dot around with the joystick. And then if I hit the right button, I have my focus mode. I pretty much keep it on single. Again, I know a lot of people probably use automatic or continuous, but I'm that guy that likes to get something, hold it down halfway, focus on it, and then take a bunch of photos. So there's 3 more like weird little buttons on the camera. The AEL button can be mapped as well. This is my favorite setting. This is probably like the #1 reason to use this camera and this lens. I switched it to the APS-C Super 35 crop toggle. Huge, huge. The previous Sony cameras had this feature where you could switch the chip size from full frame to APS-C, but you couldn't map it to a button. Now you can map it to a button. So what happens is this 35mm lens becomes something close to a 50mm lens at the push of a button, because by changing the chip size, not changing the lens, but changing the chip size. So I pretty much get the 2 best street photography focal lengths at the push of a button. And I use this all the time. If I don't feel comfortable getting close to a subject that I'm trying to photograph, or I want to get in a little tighter, just hit the button, get in a little bit tighter. If I want to get a nice wider shot, hit the button, come out wider. It is phenomenal. It's like a whole different way of working. It's gonna make you wanna buy a lot of prime lenses. I love it. So for the AF on button, I've switched the AF on button to IAF, which is something a lot of people do. Eye autofocus is a mode on Sony cameras where if you can see someone's eyeball and you hold this down, it actually grabs focus right on the eyeball. I tend to use this more for portrait and strobe photography, but I have found situations where if you really wanna grab someone out on the street and you're close enough to get kind of a close-up or a portrait or a medium shot, you can hit this and you can really latch onto their eyes. And then the last thing you can map is the focus hold button. That's actually a button that's on lenses that I don't have, so I left that one alone. Guys, I'm in Toronto. My show is crazy. I'm working like a dog. This is the first chance I've had to make a video in a long time, so I hope you guys liked it. I'll see you next time. That was pretty lame.